The 80s were an era of musical excess, and photographer Mark WEISSGUY Weiss was there to document the biggest and most dangerous bands of the time. From Van Halen, Ozzy, and Metallica, to Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, and Guns N' Roses, the Decade That Rocked podcast will look back at the period's most historic music and moments through Mark's iconic images. New interviews with rock stars, both old and new, will give fans a backstage pass to the most hedonistic era in music. Along for the ride is me, Mark's co-host, Greg Alprin, music journalist, comedy podcast host, and 80s rock addict, and I'll help shape the conversation from a fan's perspective. Come with us for a decadent celebration of the decade that rocked. All right, here we are about to record episode number 2, and we have to start off with the story about how you got your first camera from a guy whose lawn you were mowing.
I was the kid in the neighborhood that would like knock on people's door when there was like a lawn that was unkept. So I knocked on this guy's door and I said, "Do you need your lawn mowed?" He's like, "No, I do it myself." I said, "No, it doesn't look that way." And he looked at me like a smart ass, and I was. And he's like, "I tell you what, kid," I said, "if you mow my lawn for the season, I'll give you this camera." And he showed me this camera, 35 millimeter camera, and it looked like $1 million. And I said, "Okay." 2 months later, he gave me the camera. That's where I got my first camera.
So he made you work 2 months for that camera.
Yes. And to me, it looked like it was worth like $500. I figured, maybe I'll hawk it at the pawn shop next, across the street.
Do you remember what kind of camera it was?
Yeah, it's a Bell and Howell Canon camera. I am looking at it as we speak. It looks at me every morning to remind me of me mowing the lawn.
So what was the first thing you shot with that camera?
My dog Domino. Yeah.
Do you have that
Domino,
picture?
Of course, it's in my book actually.
Right.
Yeah, and my brother Jay, who used to ride motorcycles, that was exciting about that. So, I liked for things that moved. My dog used to run away from my house all the time, so I photographed him running away from me. And my brother used to ride motorcycles. I liked action, but
Right.
at the time, I really wasn't involved in music at all until he joined a band, and he had me around him, and he started introducing me to rock and roll, and that's how I got interested in music.
Right. So when did you transition to like actually making money shooting music?
1974, 76, I went to see Aerosmith at Madison Square Garden. I took my camera in, I snuck in, I got real close, took some pictures. I brought it into the kids in my class in high school, and they were like, "Whoa, those are really cool photos. Would you sell them? Sell them to me." I'm like, "Yeah, of course." So for the next couple of years, I sold my pictures out of my high school locker for like $1 a piece. And then I took it a step further in my junior year in high school, and I used to sell them at front of the concerts. I went a little next step further.
Wow.
So that's where I started making it a business. I
Yeah.
stole them in the high school locker, out of my high school locker, and also in front of the concerts. And then I got arrested at a Kiss concert selling them in front of Madison Square Garden, 1977. And then I said, "All right, now what am I going to do?" I went to jail overnight with all the short
Wow.
sellers and the bootleggers, and I went home. And when I went home, I saw this circus magazine staring right at me that I had a subscription to, and I'm like, "Why don't I like see where are they?" And I opened it up, and it was New York City, which was an hour away from me. And I went there and knocked on the door, and it was good timing. I saw the art director, and he said, "I like what you're doing, but you got to shoot with this film and do this and do that." 6 months later, Aerosmith played at the Giant Stadium with Ted Nugent, Mahogany Rush, and
Right.
Journey. Had great pictures. I dropped them off. A month later, they used one for Centerfold and Circus Magazine.
Wow.
And then it just snowballed from there.
All from a teenager just walking into the headquarters and saying, "Hey, I want to shoot some pictures for you."
I mean, I don't know what happened if he said, "Get out of here, kid."
Right.
I don't know if I would have would have been like a dog with my tail between my legs and said, "Oh, okay, I guess I'll keep mowing lawns and maybe I'll have a successful lawn mowing business."
Right.
Or I would have knocked on another door. I
Yeah.
don't know. I really don't know. I would hope I would have kept knocking until someone opened it, but it just happened to be the first door that I knocked on, which was one of the biggest magazines at the time,
Sure.
Circus Magazine. everything happens for a reason. It's fate. There's you just, if you don't go, you don't know,
Yeah, it's funny because it's actually a good transition to how I got started in the music business,
How
which
did you get started in the music business?
I back in when there was actually radio stations that had radio concerts, I wanted to go to a concert that was one of these radio only shows. You had to either win tickets or go get in line at 4 o'clock in the morning to get the 50 tickets that were given out to fans the day of the show, and there was just no way I was doing that. And it was one of my favorite bands at the time, Nine Inch Nails. So I had a friend who worked for one of the big record labels in the city who I said, hey, can you help me get into this show? And he was like, no, but I know who their publicist is at Interscope. Here's the guy's name and number. Give him a call. You're good at talking, your way into stuff. I bet you could come up with a good story. So I spent like an hour thinking, what story could I come up with? So I called the guy, and off the cuff, I told him, listen, man, I'm starting a music magazine next week, and I really want to go to this show and cover Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, and Pop Will Eat Itself. And we just had a very cool conversation for like 5 minutes. And he was like, all right, meet me at the Heartland Brewery and I'll hook you up with a couple of passes at 7 o'clock for the show. And I'm like, okay. And so I went to the show, met him, got the tickets, went into the show. And then the next day I'm like, I got to start a music magazine because I told this guy that I had one that I didn't really have yet. And from that day forward, I called up a buddy that was in the web building business and said, you need to build me a website for a music magazine that I told a guy last night that I started. And he did. And that magazine lasted for 8 years. It was called Full Throttle Music. And we started with Nine Inch Nails. And by the time that magazine ran its course, we interviewed every single hard rock and heavy metal band that started from 1999 through 2007 when we ultimately had to fold that magazine. But it was all because I had to get into a show and I needed to figure out how to do it.
Well, whenever a new photographer asks me, like, how do you break into the business? I really want to do what you're doing. I love what you did and all that. And I said, start your own website.
Yeah.
Start a blog. Let them know that you have something to offer them, because they're not going to give you a photo pass or unless you can offer them something.
Yeah.
So exactly what you did, I think a lot of people followed.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
that's good advice, because especially today, everyone is with social media. If you show that you can create a following, then you're gonna be successful,
Yeah,
and
for
you'll
sure.
get your access.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because the one big brush with success we had in shooting stuff is I had to hire photographers to go in and shoot stuff for me. So what I would do is basically trade people. Hey, you shoot because I know you're a good photographer, and I'll get you into these shows. And they were ecstatic. You're going to let me get into Elton John and shoot him at Madison Square Garden? And I'm like, sure. So the one we had where we actually had our picture chosen to be used in the New York Times for like the concert ads were when Jimmy Page went on tour with the Black Crowes. The publicist liked some of our photos and said, hey, can you send me some of your photos? We may use them for the ads for the show. And they ultimately chose one of them. But what happened was those shows got canceled. So the ad, it never ran. Like the picture they showed never ran for the ad for the show. And that tour got pushed off to the summer the following year. But that would have been cool to see one of our photos in, New York Times.
But you got to be a squeaky wheel out there. Yeah. There's opportunity if you stick to what you do, like you did, and look where it brought us together.
Yeah, for sure.
I put a book out. You interviewed me, and now we're doing a podcast.
Yeah, well, we interviewed you under
about.
A little different circumstance for a different podcast I'm involved with, which is comedy, which is an odd thing. But when I saw you pop up as an opportunity for us to talk to, and what your book is and how meaningful that is to me personally, it was a no-brainer. We had to talk to this guy that I'd postered my walls with when I was in high school. My mother would come in my room and be like, who's that girl on your wall? And I'm like, no, that's Cece DeVille from Poison. That's not a girl, right? And she'd be like, oh. And she's like, who's that guy? And I'm like, that's actually Lita Ford. That is a girl. So, right? But it just brought back so many memories, which is what I think we're going to build for people who are fans of the music and fans of yours. And, looking through your book, it's it just brings back every memory of wherever I was at the time. And I know that it does that for other people when they flip through and see stuff, and then expose new people to you through the music and the images. It really is an awesome thing to be involved in. And I really appreciate that we put this together.
Well, my goal is to find the new generation.
Right.
I mean, and I'm excited about the 20-year-olds that are just getting exposed to it. And like you said in the previous episode when we did a kind of introduction, is that like my photographs kind of they're gonna pick up the book and they're gonna look at it and they're gonna go, who is you know AC/DC? You know, maybe they don't know who AC/DC is, you know, or maybe they just know who Judas Priest is, and they saw Judas Priest on in a magazine, and they referenced it to the book. So these kids, they might only know one person in that book, and then get exposed to it because they heard about it, and then they look at it, and there's this whole, it's like an encyclopedia of what really made the 80s, all this music. So I'm excited to expose this to new generations and to bring it to them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not even just the 80s. It's when you look back at the book and the time period, so many of those bands are still out doing it now. I mean, now, obviously, whatever, pre all this, but still out doing it. I mean, the first concert, I have 2 teenage boys, and the first concert I took them to was Kiss and Def Leppard when they were like 9 and 12 years old. And I dressed them up I painted their faces, and, to this day, 5 years later, they're Kiss fans and Def Leppard fans. And then that led them to AC/DC and then to Iron Maiden last summer. So, I have a 16-year-old kid who is now as obsessed as I was with those bands from when I was in high school. The first Iron Maiden concert I went to see was Peace of Mind or Somewhere in Time when I was in high school. And he followed that up when he was a junior in high school. I mean, it's just wild to think about. And that's what we're exposing people to through your book and all the music and everything that you've done through that time period.
Oh, well, and that's what this podcast is about.
It sure is. So, like, I know this is going to put you on the spot, but like, what are some of your favorite bands of the era?
I mean, Kiss, Aerosmith. I mean, Led Zeppelin's not the era, but that's one of my, that's,
of course.
I think like when I talk to a lot of the bands that I photographed in the 80s, it seems like Aerosmith, Kiss, and Led Zeppelin were their go-to bands.
Yeah.
And those 3 bands helped shape them into what was made of the 80s.
Right.
But in the 80s, I mean, I love Cinderella.
Right.
I love Skid Row. I love, Ozzy, Rat. I like Dokken. I mean, I don't think I have a favorite. I really, I'm in love with all the bands that were out there.
Yeah. And they're all still going. All of them.
They're all still going. And like, there's no decade out there.
Yeah.
That you could really say that about. I mean, the 70s were awesome. But I feel like because of MTV
for sure
and the media, and the 80s was just such a excess of like, I want, I get.
Yeah.
And then after that, the 90s came, and the 2000s, and it just kind of, something about that decade. It was just a special decade that it was all about like really fun rock and roll.
Yeah.
And I don't think that genre is ever going to get old.
No, I don't think so either. It's, most of that music is raw, and dangerous and fun, right? So it's not what happened, at least from the mid 90s on. You had some grunge stuff in the early 90s, and that had obviously a hell of a run, and lots of those bands are still out doing it. But then music just got so produced, like overproduced, and the boy band era and all of it just changed, right? So when you think back to the 80s, the reason those guys are still around and doing it is because the music transcends 5, 10, 12 years at a time. It just flows through and makes sense to everybody, no matter what age you are.
I mean, people say like that era was all about like the clothes and the hair
Yeah,
and the hairspray and all this and that, but it really wasn't. I mean, you take all that away, and these guys are musicians.
sure.
They're prolific writers and high energy. And it was just a fashion trend,
Right.
for a few years. It was a fashion trend,
Yeah.
everyone outdoing everyone, and
Yep.
fashion designers like, trying to make money and saying, hey, this is what you should be doing, and MTV loves this. And so
Yeah.
it was a period where fashion kind of took over a
Right.
little bit too much, but we're talking about it now. It's
Sure.
like we're not talking about jeans and overalls,
Nope.
we're talking about, like my Underlock and Key album with Dokken,
Yep.
where they're all wearing these silly outfits,
Hmm.
but we're talking about it.
For sure.
So
And we're going to
so
talk about it. That's what this podcast is going to be about. Not about the fashion, but
right.
certainly everything that made the music what it was and where it is today. So without getting too much into what's to come, we talked a little bit about it in the first one, and obviously now introduced ourselves more in depth to the people who are going to be listening. I don't want to give away too many surprises, but we have a lot of killer stuff to come. You can obviously go out and get the book, The Decade That Rocked. Any way you want to particularly end this 15-minute chat?
uh just really, I mean, just after, I didn't know what to expect. I started this book 5 years ago. It took a lot of turns, hills and valleys, with different things. I wasn't really sure how I wanted it, but once I got focused, I just stuck to it. And I've been literally sitting right here as I speak to you now in my office for 5 years, like hardly going on vacations, and like just driving everyone crazy by saying I can't do this, I can't do that, because I had to focus, and I had to stick to my guns on a lot of things. And the publisher stuck to their guns, and it came out to be a very successful book. And I just want I, I just want everyone to know that we're gonna try to like take what I did in my book and just take it to uh where we're at right now, as
Yeah,
far as fans, how they feel about it, exposing new fans to the book, because that's the main goal, is to
right.
like kind of expose,
Yeah.
and
And
and that's it.
And then for anyone listening, if you want to send us questions, you can do that through Mark's website, The Decade That Rocked. We'll answer them. We'll do our best to. And right now, out on the newsstand is the issue of Rolling Stone that has a full couple-page spread of Mark's work in there. If you want to check that out, because the book is sold out everywhere online, on Amazon, everywhere. You can't even get a hold of one, which is in some cases amazing, in other cases kind of stinks for people that want this book.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
the Rolling Stone article's out. You can take a quick ganders through there, and we will keep filling you in, and hopefully you're going to come back for more episodes with great interviews with artists you want to hear from.